as the leadoff hitter going back to, I believe, the Arkansas series. But his number got called when things got shuffled around on Saturday with Ethan Petrie being out. And boy, did he step up with those 2 home runs.
Yeah, he was a complete surprise to go out there and play the way he did. I mean, look, he's always been a solid player in my opinion, but he had definitely struggled in SEC play a little bit when he was starting before Brindley came into the fold. But Dylan had found out 20 minutes before the game that Ethan Petrie wasn't going to be playing, so Brewer got the chance to start, and he took full advantage, hitting 2 homers, and definitely carried South Carolina in that unfortunate loss to NC State.
As well, played the audio a little bit earlier. Will Tippett with the walk-off sac fly in the in the bottom of the 10th inning to win against James Madison on Friday. And he's somebody that, of course, we did lose for a while there due to that injury, but had really kind of hit his stride after he stopped being a switch hitter in the middle of the season. But comes back in the fold and is able to step up and give you at least a couple good performances to close out the season there. But especially a huge one on Friday night.
Yeah, the summer of Tippett was fun while it lasted, but he had a nice little run in Hoover and Raleigh. Hit 2 homers this weekend, and obviously had the walk-off in game 1. But I've always thought his defense has always been pretty sharp. I think he only made 1 error over the last 2 weeks. I think he made a throwing error in Hoover, if I'm not mistaken. But this weekend, looked sharp at shortstop. He's definitely grown, in my opinion. Look, you can look at batting average all you want and talk about how that doesn't make him a good player, but I think he's really grown in the second half of the season since making that switch to just hitting right-handed, and I think he's definitely going to take a big leap forward in his junior year.
And last one, and he's somebody that we're going to be talking about for a long time to come when it comes to South Carolina baseball. Cole Messina, who just was on an absolute heater last week in Hoover, setting records for the SEC tournament, and came in the same way on Friday night. Hits that game tying home run in the bottom of the 9th there when things looking pretty bleak for South Carolina. And I know yesterday didn't go the way that Cole Messina wanted to go, and Saturday, quite frankly, didn't go the way he wanted to go either. But nonetheless, well, what an incredible player he's been for South Carolina, and through most of the postseason showed you that.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know why James Madison even thought about pitching to Moose with, as the game-tying run at the plate in the 9th inning with 2 outs. I mean, I would have just walked him with Parker Nolan, who just continuously grounded out the second this entire weekend and really didn't do anything productive outside of maybe making a few defensive plays. But yeah, Moose, I mean, what can you say about him? He's going to be an awesome draft pick for whoever gets him this year, in my opinion. Maybe there's the off chance he comes back to Carolina, but his stock is so high right now. He needs to go down the MLB route, and he's going to have a great future, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
Well, now it's time to have the uncomfortable conversation, because South Carolina did end up coming up short of where people, at bare minimum, I think a lot of people said they should have gotten at least back to a super this year, because that's what they were able to do last year. And again, when you have a program that's had the heights of success South Carolina's had, taking a step back is not going to go over well in a lot of people's eyes. Coach Kingston's been here for a while, has not made it to Omaha, has only made it to 2 supers, getting bounced in both of those. And I'm not the guy that pounds on the table and says, you need to fire this guy, you need to move on, do all this, do all that. But at this point, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'd be shocked if they decided to make a change.
So I have to agree with you. I think I've been, throughout this whole year, I've tried to be, objectively speaking, optimistic. I thought that time and time again, they're going to get it turned around. They're going to right the ship. Mark Kingston, I thought, for some of the season was doing a pretty good job, and I felt the hate coming his way and the backlash was kind of a little bit unwarranted, because at the end of the day, it's coaching is part of the reason for why the season kind of didn't go exactly to plan, but at the same time, players have to execute, right? You got to be able to hit. You got shut out yesterday by James Madison. Got to be able to hit in key situations, and part of that does come down to coaching, like I said, but it also comes down to players executing. So, point is, though, look, I like Mark. I've covered him since 2020. He's always been good to me. I think I don't think bad coach. I think he's a fine coach. However, he hasn't been to Omaha at all. And, you can say he took a step back this year. I mean, he had a good team last year that got to a super, 2 wins away from Omaha. And then this year, you had a chance to host a regional, maybe even a super if things played out in your favor, and you end up going on the road for a regional. That's not acceptable in my opinion. I think it is time for a change, if I'm being honest. And you gotta hire the right guy next if it does come to that point. I don't know who it's gonna be. I don't know when it's gonna be. I don't even know if it's gonna happen. But I just think, in my opinion, I've seen enough this year to make me feel like, okay, I think South Carolina needs to have a change in leadership.
And you've, like you said, been covering the Coach Kingston program since 2020. This is only my second baseball season here at South Carolina, but I'm interested to know your thoughts on this. At what point do you think the fan base kind of shifted on Coach Kingston, saying, okay, well, this probably isn't going to be the guy to get us where we want to go?
Let's be honest. I mean, it's been like this the entire season. I think I look on, message boards every single day or Twitter, and I see at least one comment a day with the line "Fire Kingston." Like it's been like this. I think for maybe it's been longer than this year, but I've definitely noticed it throughout this entire season. And I know the fan base is definitely had enough. I mean, they've made that clear as day. But I think it's just, I don't know. I think it is. It feels like it's time. The way Mark was kind of talking yesterday, look, he said all the right things in his press conference yesterday, but the way I just saw him sitting there in the dugout after the game, and some of the the photos that were taken of him in the dugout, and just the look on his face in the press conference, like that looked like a man that kind of knew, like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be back here next year. Like, and he says, he should have the full, support of the administration to, put together a winning program here. Everyone wants to win. I think at this level is what he said. But I think there are better coaches out there. I think you got to start fresh. I mean, if you haven't made it to Omaha now, I mean, what's going to change next year? That's just my take on it. I don't see. I think they've reached their ceiling here with Mark Kingston, getting to a super. Think about it this way. In your first year, you made it one win away from going to Omaha. Since then, you haven't really come close outside of making it to one of the super. Every year has been an up and down roller coaster. You make a super one year, then you miss the postseason, then you have the COVID year, then you get bounced out of your home regional, then you go under 500, then you go to a super, and then you get bounced in a regional. It's not consistent, and you need to find a coach out there that can get you back to consistency and back to Omaha.
You mentioned what Coach Kingston had to say after the game yesterday, where he believed that the administration gave him their full support. Is there any part of you that thinks they might not make a change and they might keep rolling with him?
Oh gosh, I've thought about it. Indeed, it would not totally surprise me if they ran it back for another year. The thing is, his buyout never really got changed in his contract after last year, despite getting a better contract extension and stuff. So the buyout is now down to $400,000. So it's cut in half. And if you wait until after next year, I believe it goes down to $200,000. But if that's the reason that South Carolina is going to keep him around for another year, I think that's true and acceptable. I mean, this is the University of South Carolina baseball program we're talking about. This university can afford $400,000. If they can pay the buyouts of Will Muschamp and Frank Martin, I don't see a reason why you can't pay another one with Mark Kingston. I just feel like, I don't know. It wouldn't totally surprise me. I'd give it maybe in my head, maybe a 10% chance it's back next year. That's with just my thought process on it. That's no inside info or anything. That's just my take on it, and I don't know. I think they really do need to make a change, and you got to make it quick because the portal is open today, and it's open till July 2nd. And the longer you wait, the less time you're going to have to bring back your own potential talent that you want to, as well as go out and get other guys in the portal.
Well, as this season concludes now for South Carolina baseball, what's kind of your lasting thought, lasting impression of what you saw through 62 games this year?
Yeah, as I keep saying, inconsistent. That's the name of the game. Look, I don't think the players deserve all the blame for the season. I think a lot of it does come down to coaching and stuff. But I think they had potential. They had potential, but I just don't think they could ever really fully put it together. But when I look back on the season, I think there have been worse seasons under Mark Kingston, in my opinion. But I do feel like I keep saying, I think it is time for a change. I think it's time to move on. I appreciate all that Mark has done, for this program over the years and done for the media and stuff, and all the players this year have been awesome and stuff, and the coaching staff. But there needs to be this is a huge offseason for South Carolina, and you can't really botch it. You cannot botch it. Otherwise, it's just, in my opinion, 2025 would be another year of mediocrity, and I don't think that's acceptable at an SEC baseball program.
Well, I think a lot of people are on pins and needles waiting for a decision to happen probably in the very near future here. But Jack, we certainly appreciate it. And I was thinking about this last night. We've had you on one to multiple times a week, going all the way back to basketball season as well, because you were on that beat as well. So, man, we appreciate your insight. We appreciate your grind. I know it's been a long several months, and you're probably looking forward to a little bit of reprieve as the summer goes along before we get kicked into football. But, I just want to say thanks for everything you did, and thanks for checking in with us each and every week, and we'll try and get you in here a little bit during the summer and get your thoughts on other things besides South Carolina baseball and South Carolina basketball.
Yeah, no, I appreciate everyone on 107.5's game for having me on, and always appreciate talking with you every week. And it's been up and down baseball season. It was a great basketball season, and hopefully with football season things are a little better. And yeah, hopefully this is like I said, it's a big summer for South Carolina baseball. Got to get things right. Whatever decision they make, gotta make it clear that they're going to do whatever they need to do to get to Omaha. And we'll see what happens. But I appreciate you having me on as always. And yeah, take care, man.
Absolutely, great work, and we'll hear from you soon.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, Jack Belcher again from GamecockCentral.com on the grind this entire up and down baseball season. See some of you wanting to weigh in on the Love Chevrolet phone lines and the Firehouse Subs text line. We'll get to some of those thoughts. Coming up next is we're airing our grievances of the South Carolina baseball season in 2024. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday on the Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head with you here on The Game. Appreciate everybody watching us on The Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass, powered by our friends over at Integrated Media. As I mentioned, was going to allow y'all the opportunity to share your thoughts and feelings on South Carolina baseball and what happens next with this program. And no person to start that off better on the Love Chevrolet phone lines. And Gamecock Larry. Gamecock Larry, appreciate your call this morning. What's on your mind?
Well, you said, what can we do? I'll tell you what we can, what I would do, and I would tell you what Coach Tanner should do. He should be calling them a couple of people into his office and sit them down and say, here's your payout. You're fired. You need to leave. We haven't had a set weekend series rotation since the second weekend of the season. And it's not because of the pitching is that bad. It's because we don't have no pitching coach. When you make a complete change from your number Friday night starter to a Saturday starter because you're facing one of the best pitchers in the league on Friday night, you're going to change it. He don't know what he's doing. And as far as the starting lineup, I don't know whether Kingston even know what a lineup is. Why did he pinch hit a guy, a young man that hasn't been to the plate in almost 2 months for LaCroix, whatever his name is? Why did he pinch hit him with the guy that hadn't batted in 2 months? And he's been injured and he's been hurt a lot. But why? I don't understand it at all, and I don't think Kingston understands it. One thing about Kingston, he's a talker. Yeah, we good. We just not great right now. Lord, I don't know you're not. I'm gonna tell you, it's not the players. It is not the players. It is the coaches, head coach especially, and the pitching coach. And Tanner, they got to go. They got to go. I don't know who we can get, but anybody that we get can be better than what we've got. That's all I got to say. I'm just aggravated, man, I'll tell you. I just hope the good Lord gives me another year where I can say what we'll do next year. If you get rid of what we got now and you get somebody, I think we're going to be all right. Love y'all. Go Gamecock.
Appreciate it as always, Gamecock Larry. And look, you're not wrong. And I think you echo the sentiments of a lot of people in this fan base of the frustration of, being where this program is right now. And, underachieving in a lot of ways. And he mentioned the pitch hitting thing, and this may have gotten lost in the shuffle of the weekend if you weren't aware of it. But the second game when they played NC State on Saturday, in the top of the ninth, where South Carolina needed to score 2 runs to at least tie the game and keep the game going, with no outs and Dalton Reeves on first, they pinch hit Tyler Causey for Talmadge LeCroy. And Causey ends up striking out. Nolan strikes out. Brewer flies out. Game's over. Coach Kingston was asked about that after the game on Saturday, and he cited analytics and the matchup there because of how that pitcher was doing against lefties compared to righties, which is why they decided to make that switch there. But at the same time, Talmadge LeCroy, up to that point that weekend, was 3 of 6. Like he had been putting the ball in play, been doing a good job at the plate, and you feel like that would have maybe been the better option. I get what he was saying from the analytical standpoint and liking the matchup a little bit more, but similarly with what we talked about with Tyler Causey and possibly playing third base going into the weekend, he just hasn't played a whole lot. Like, this is a guy that has not really been in your lineup for the most part over the past month. You know what I mean? So that is a tough ask for one, if he were to come in at third base as your starter. Like, I don't think anybody was on board with that. But, 2, to put him in that situation with, with so much on the line, with needing so much to happen in that ninth inning, I don't love that necessarily. Now, if he was somebody with a little more playing time, a little bit more experience, again, within the past month, then, maybe that's a better option. But I do think maybe you could have taken a chance with Lee Croy there, and you may have had a little bit better result. Was that the reason why you lost that game? It wasn't, but it was one of those decisions that we certainly were curious about as the weekend went along. Plenty more thoughts to get on this. Again, y'all waiting in the Firehouse Subs text line. If you got more thoughts, let us know on Love Chevrolet phone line as well, 834-46100, as we continue to unpack the 2024 South Carolina baseball season and what that means going forward. And there's one angle to the Kingston conversation that I think is worth mentioning again, because I brought it up a couple weeks ago, but I think it bears repeating, especially given what happened last night elsewhere in the NCAA tournament. This is all coming up next in hour number 2. Tyler Head along with you. It is the Extra Point, reacting to the end of South Carolina's baseball season here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point, hour number 2. Tyler Head along with you here on the game, unpacking the end of South Carolina's 2024 baseball season and what that means going forward for this Gamecock baseball program. A lot of that centers around Coach Kingston and, if he is going to continue to lead the charge here at South Carolina as the head coach. As I mentioned, a lot of you weighing in, as I expected you would, with thoughts on Coach Kingston. Monty weighs in and says, the expectation in South Carolina is to have a regional in Columbia 5 out of 10 years and at least see a super regional now and then. That is the expectation. If you can't do that, that is this is the wrong coaching job for you. Tim in Charlotte weighs in and says, gotta wait for that to load. Hold on a second there. But he's alluding to the fact that South Carolina scored 0 runs against a middle of the road pitching staff, and that's something we talked about going into the weekend. Here it is. We scored 0 runs against a team in their third game, so not exactly an ace on the mound. The super saved Kingston last year, but I still was not excited about him coming back. It's been 7 overall underwhelming years. Time for a change. And again, I think that echoes the sentiment of how a lot of people feel about this Gamecock baseball program. And as we're having this conversation, I do think it's important to note, and I understand this fully, this is a person we're talking about here, Coach Kingston. That is his job that people are saying that he shouldn't have anymore, and his livelihood, how he makes his money, all that kind of stuff. So there is that human aspect of it that I do think can be overlooked when we're having these kind of conversations. But at the same time, Coach Kingston gets paid very well to be the head baseball coach here at South Carolina, and with that comes a level of expectation that up to this point, a lot of people feel like he is not meeting. You know what I mean? And Tim, talks about it there, and Monty as well, that when you look at his body of work and now, 7 full seasons as South Carolina's head baseball coach, 2 trips to a super. As Jack mentioned a little bit earlier, you were one game away from, going to Omaha in that first year in the Fayetteville Super Regional. You made it to a super last year, which that's great. And that's something that you perennially should be doing here at South Carolina. But the fact that it does not seem that you were trending in the right direction, I think is where a lot of people are disappointed and let down. Because again, last year was a reason for hope. And again, that was kind of the bare minimum of expectation I think a lot of people set on this team this year is like, okay, well, you should at least get back to a super. And you know what? If you go out there on Sunday and you have this, back and forth game and scoring a lot of runs and you just end up falling short in the very end, that's one thing. But to just kind of limp across the finish line the way that you did, especially offensively yesterday, I think that's what puts more of a sour taste in people's mouth, that it just looked like you were just completely flat in what was the most important game of the entire year. Let's hear some of Coach Kingston's thoughts as he talked to the media after the game when he's posed the question, number 6 here, Dave, is this program where it needs to be?
I think every program in the country wants to keep getting better. We're no different. The SEC is filled with teams that are dumping huge resources in, and I think it's just a matter of we need to continue to, do everything we can to try to give this program what it needs to be successful. There's so many parts of our program that are in great shape. But obviously we need to keep getting better, bottom line.
And look, that's exactly what Coach Kingston should say there. Obviously, he's going to, try his hardest to continue to be the head coach here at South Carolina. So he's not going to go out there and say that, I think this program's terrible. I think we're a long way from Omaha and all those kind of things. Like, he's going to stick up for himself. He's going to stick up for his coaching staff. So that's kind of the answer that you expect to give to give there. But he also makes a good point that every program expects to be better. And that is certainly the case here at South Carolina, where that bar of expectation is always going to be set high, that not just anybody can come in here and succeed, unfortunately. And that's where I think the Georgia aspect of this is really interesting. You're thinking Georgia aspect, what the heck are you talking about? If you've forgotten, I said this after the Georgia series a couple weeks back where the Bulldogs came in, swept South Carolina, and we were feeling very down about this team coming away from that weekend. Georgia is a baseball program that, much like South Carolina, enjoyed a lot of success through the 90s and 2000s, the national championship back in 1990, multiple trips to Omaha, last going there in 2008 where they played for the World Series championship against Fresno State, coming up a little bit short. That was 16 years ago. Georgia had not been back to a super regional, they'd not been back to a super since then. They were routinely a team that would make a regional and get bounced. And this past offseason, they made a change. Scott Strickland been there for 10 years, could not get them to a super regional, much less get them to Omaha. And in the minds of that fan base, that was unacceptable. They make a change. They bring in Wes Johnson, who had never been a coach before. A very well-respected pitching coach at both the college and professional level, but again, had never been a skipper for any kind of team prior to going to Georgia. And what does he do? He takes Georgia to a super regional in year number 1 as a program. Thrilling game last night between Georgia and Georgia Tech over there at Foley Field in Athens. And why is this relevant to South Carolina? Because that's a program that passed you by. If you look at the numbers and the matchups, and again, South Carolina's postseason success compared to Georgia's over the course of the past decade, South Carolina has been a better program than Georgia. Under Coach Kingston, South Carolina has been, in a manner, in total body of work, a better program than what Georgia has been. So for a first-year guy, one state over, to come in with no prior head coaching experience and pass you by, and in the process of doing that, come in and sweep you in your own home venue, I think that reflects even worse on Mark Kingston. Because people look at that and say, well, didn't take that guy anytime. And for all, Georgia could be an Omaha team this year. They're that good. If you watched them when they came to Founders Park, if you watched them play this weekend, that's a darn good team. And they could be going to Omaha. And again, I think that's just makes the comparison look even worse. When you look at, Kingston and this kind of treading waterness with this program compared to, again, what Wes Johnson's done in just 1 year over there at, over there at Georgia. So, and again, I don't want to be the guy that's banging on the desk saying, you need to fire this guy, you need to fire that guy. But same time, there does come to a point where a change is more likely than not going to be made. And we have to, as a program, I think really look yourself in the mirror and say, what do we want to be? You know what I mean? There is I don't know if "or" is the right word, a notion about South Carolina baseball that's persisted for a long time, where when you see the SC on your schedule, that you strike fear in your opponent, right? Man, Carolina's coming to town. Man, you got to go to Founders Park. Like, that was a scary proposition for anybody. And I go back to a couple weeks ago when South Carolina was going up to Knoxville, take on the then, number 1 Tennessee team. When Tony Vitello was asked, in his media availability leading up to that series, not once did he mention South Carolina by name. Or, they're this team, they're that team. Like, it was just a complete afterthought that they were playing South Carolina. And I think, that's just one coach. But I think that's a perfect encapsulation of where this program is now, that a program that's at the heights of college baseball right now just is completely, not worried about what South Carolina brings. And, of course, Tennessee ended up sweeping South Carolina, so they were justified in thinking that. But I think that just kind of shows where this program's at, unfortunately, right now. It is a middle-tier SEC program. And, look, you're not going to be able to stay at the top of the mountain forever. Nobody does. But it feels like you are miles and miles away from achieving that again. You know what I mean? It's one thing if you feel like it's just out of reach and you're constantly knocking on the door of breaking back through and being one of those top-tier programs. Once again, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like you are a long way away from that. And again, Coach Kingston, nice guy, very respectable to the media, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if he's the guy that's going to be able to get you to that next level. Now, if he were to stay around here for another 10 years, I think this program would be probably consistent. I think they'd be over 500 most years. I think that they would probably, be able to put together a win or two in Hoover and probably be in the postseason more often than not, but that's not good enough here. You know what I mean? Like there are, and Kentucky's kind of a bad example this year because they're obviously having a great season, but Kentucky in years past, like, we make this joke all the time that they care about basketball. They don't care about football. They watch football. They really probably don't care about baseball that much either. They're enjoying a great season. But, you know, if you go to Kentucky and say, all right, we'll make a regional 3 out of every 7 years, and maybe we'll go to 1 super in that point in time, most people would say, that's good. That's cool. But South Carolina's different. South Carolina has a high bar of expectation, and rightfully so. National championships, back-to-back, nearly 3 a decade ago. Like, the fan base is not wrong for placing this program on this high shelf and expecting them to be in the upper echelon of college baseball all the time. And unfortunately, that's just not where they are as of right now. And Jack brought up a really good point when we talked to him a little bit earlier. You know, whatever your decision is, whether that be to move on or keep Kingston, because I think that's still a possibility. I know you're probably driving off the road if you're listening on the radio and you hear me say that right now, but it could happen. I'm just playing devil's advocate. You have to understand that's really a realistic possibility too. It's not a foregone conclusion. They're going to make a move. So that could happen as well. But regardless, you have to decide what you're going to do relatively quickly because, as you mentioned, portal's opening up. Guys going to be moving here, there, and everywhere. And I don't know what roster retention is going to look like here. I don't know what kind of talent they can bring in from the transfer portal. But I do know one thing: you need to solidify whatever your coaching situation is going to be as soon as possible, so you can get that ball rolling on next year and setting yourself up for the for the most success. And again, I don't try to be the hey. We got to get rid of this guy. We got to get rid of that guy. Like, that's not me. You know what I mean? But there does come to a point where, again, the move happens, change is made. I'm not going to sit here and say that it was the wrong choice. You know what I mean? And I hate that we have to talk about this. I hate that this is the conversation that we're coming away from not only this weekend, but this season. You know? But it's come to that point. And I think a lot of you got to be on pins and needles, anxiously waiting to see something change. Will it change? I think so. But I can't definitively tell you for sure as of right now. So we'll have to see. More of your thoughts. A lot of you waiting in the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. We'll get to some of those next as this recap of Carolina's 2024 season and what happens next continues on. Extra Point, Tyler Head along with you here on The Game.
Do you feel you have the support of the administration to get this program where it needs to be?
I'm sorry?
Do you feel you have the support of the administration to get the program where it
I
needs
think
to be?
everybody in South Carolina wants to win at a high level.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you here on the game, unpacking the end of South Carolina's 2024 baseball season. Our guy, David Cloninger, asking Coach Kingston the question yesterday after the 2-0 loss to James Madison if he believes he has the support of the administration behind him. And there was Coach Kingston's answer there. And again, we will wait and see what exactly happens with the future of this program. As we've been discussing all morning long so far, I think a change is probably like on the horizon. But if they decided to keep him, wouldn't say that's the most shocking thing in the world, so we'll have to see what happens. But a lot of you weighing in, a lot of you have thoughts and want to continue to get some of those. I got Ray hanging on the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Ray, appreciate your call this morning. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, man?
Doing great.
Yeah, I think you brought up a real valid point about the EGA program, and I'm old enough to go back to when June Raines was there, and even before June. In our baseball program, that was the one program we could hang our hat on our men's side of the ledger. I mean, we could count on the baseball program doing good. You know, we didn't make the tournament every year, but majority of the times we did, and we were a top 20 program even before Ray Tanner came there. Now, when Ray came there, of course, he put us on the pinnacle. You know, we've named stadiums after him, we've named roads after him, and rightfully so. But what I'm getting at, so if, just say, Kingston didn't work out, would that be 2 up and 2 down by a legendary coach, not able to, get the guy there that can take the program to the next level or maintain it? I'm still a big fan of Mark Kingston. I think he's a great communicator. There's things he does I really like. But at the end of the day, as they say, it's about winning games, getting to not just getting to regionals, but winning regionals, getting to Omaha every now and then. But I really think what's going to control what happens to Kingston, and I think he'll be back next year. I really do, and I think it's all about what football does in the fall. It's a program. It's a 5-win team or whatever. I think the powers that be. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to run people off because they're not going to do that, but they're going to have to start thinking about, what we need to do. Does Coach Tanner need to retire? Do we need to get an AD in that can possibly hire the next football coach? Now, I'm thinking in the future, of course. I hope that doesn't happen, but. You got to, football is always going to drive everything, and you got to think about it like that. So I think they're not in a hurry right now, but unfortunately, when you're waiting like that and your program is kind of stalling, it's just like in business. If you're not moving ahead and you're kind of, you're kind of stalling here and there, then that means you're in a death spiral. And I think to some degree, our baseball team is in a bit of a death spiral. But I do think a lot of things are going to pan out how the football program does, and when does Coach Tanner retire. But hey, man, thanks for letting me chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it as always, Ray. And again, Love Chevrolet phone lines, Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. I think that's an interesting way to look at it, that what you decide to do could be influenced by the other sports. I do think that this decision does need to be made relatively quickly, whatever they decide to do, whether it is keeping him or moving on from him. As Jack mentioned in the last hour, his buyout as of right now is at $400,000. It will go down to $200,000 next year, but and I know it's really easy to spend other people's money, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to what other buyouts in other sports have been, $400,000 does not seem like a whole lot. If they did want to decide to make that move, I could see that happening, because that does not seem like an insurmountable amount of money where you have to hold off and say, wait a minute, we got to make sure we can afford this before we move on to this coach. And that is something that you do see, with a lot of programs out there where, maybe they want to move on from a coach, but the money just is not there to do it. I mean, we saw that with Jimbo Fisher. They probably could have moved on from him 2 years ago, but, they were hoping the buyout was going to come down a little bit, and finally they just had to cut bait with him this past year, but still paid him, $77 million to go away. So Coach Kingston obviously does not command anywhere near that amount of money. So if they made the decision to move on from him, it's not like they're breaking the bank to do it. It is a lot of money to the average folks like you and me, but in the grand scheme of an athletic department, I do think that that should not be should not be too much of a deterrent there. But Ray on the camp of thinking that they're going to bring Kingston back. And again, I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here. If they did decide to, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'd be shocked by it. You know what I mean? And I think it's important to note as well that this is Ray's game. Ray Tanner was, of course, the baseball coach, led South Carolina to their highest of heights and all that success. So he understands the game of baseball better than anybody. So there could be elements of what Kingston does that he believes in and he thinks will, in time, bring the results they're hoping for. And that's the funny thing when we talk about coaches is at the end of the day, they're not the ones out there actually performing on the field. They are just, setting the chess pieces in motion to hopefully operate the best game plan possible. But there are, at the end of the day, it is up to the players, the 18 to 22-year-olds, to go out there and perform. Now, again, you have to develop those players. You have to get them to a point and to a certain skill level where they're going to be able to compete, and that does fall back on the coaches. But again, Coach Tanner, being a former baseball coach, is going to understand better than any of us what is in Coach Kingston's control and what isn't in Coach Kingston's control. And if there is a thought process that, between injuries and maybe guys just not performing to how well you thought they were going to, that is why the season did not end up being the way that South Carolina wanted it to, maybe there is a path. Maybe there is an opportunity for them to bring Kingston back if they feel like he can take that team, to the next level at some point in the future. But again, it is a tough thing to look at this after 7 years and not feel like it is a large enough sample size to give you an idea of what a program's going to be. You know what I mean? And I'll give Coach Tanner credit because it's very evident he is not afraid to give coaches a long leash. And that is something that is rare in today's college sports where, there are so many places where they're ready to fire somebody after 2 years. I think 2 years is too soon in any sport. I think 3 years at bare minimum because that allows you to get a couple of recruiting cycles in, really kind of establish the foundation of what you want your program to be. So I don't agree with having a quick trigger, but at the same time, you also can't give them too long of a leash. You know what I mean? Because you risk just toiling in mediocrity if you aren't aggressive enough. You know what I mean? It's fair balance, and that's the reason why athletic directors get paid a lot of money to do the job they do, because that is such a fine line that you have to walk, that balance beam, if you will, of not teetering too much to one side or the other and try and stay kind of perfectly in the straight line. But again, when you talk about 7 full seasons of Coach Kingston at the helm here, I feel like you kind of have what you have. Like, I don't, and from a fan base perspective, you want to talk about people not being excited about 2025 season. If Kingston does indeed come back, I don't think you're going to see a lot of hype around this team because I don't think most people believe that he's going to be the one to ever get them back to Omaha, because it just feels like, and yeah, technically speaking, you were only a couple of wins away from getting there, but it felt like, especially watching the past 2 games this weekend, that South Carolina was more like miles and miles away from getting there based on what this team is right now and, what it can potentially be going forward. And look, you're going to lose talent not only to the draft, you're going to lose talent to the portal and all that kind of stuff. We don't know what this team's going to look like next year. Now, do you want that to be with a new head coach, or do you want that to be with somebody that's been around for a couple years and already, is established here and rooted here compared to somebody coming in new? And again, that's the decision that the higher-ups have to make. Board of Trustees, AD, all those people that they get together and decide on these things, that's on them. What the timetable of making a decision is, I don't know. Again, I would imagine it's going to come relatively soon here, because if you are trying to move on, you want to start that process of looking in to who that next head coach is going to be quickly, because maybe you're looking at somebody that's on a staff that's still going right now in a super or going to Omaha or something like that. So you want to get that ball rolling to make sure you can make whatever hire you do end up wanting to make there. But facts are the facts as of right now, as of 10:28 on your Monday morning. Coach Kingston's still the head coach here at South Carolina, maybe for another season or maybe for only a handful of hours or days or whatever it may be. But it's something we're going to keep a close eye on because, nobody's in the middle on this, to say the least. You're on one side or the other. You either want to keep him or you want to move on from him. And, we'll see what South Carolina ultimately decides to end up doing for the future of their program. It was a wild, wild weekend for regionals as a whole. And SEC did not fare as well as some people maybe thought they were going to. We'll dive into that and take a look at what some of the other teams in the SEC did, in addition to getting your thoughts as well, more on this team and more on Coach Kingston as the Extra Point rolls along. Tyler Head with you on your Monday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on this Monday, a de facto reaction Monday, I guess, as the reactions are pouring in on the Firehouse Subs text line, as well as appreciate you guys calling on the Love Chevrolet phone lines, 803-404-6100, as Carolina baseball season did indeed come to an end after the great win on Friday night in extras, the tough loss on Saturday where you were neck and neck with NC State right there, but things slipped in those final couple of innings, giving up a couple of key runs that are late, and then just looking lethargic during the entire game yesterday against James Madison. And, you know, the JMU game on Sunday, it's one of those things when you get about halfway through the game, about the fifth inning, you just kind of knew that Carolina wasn't going to be able to put anything together, right? And you hate to be that pessimistic, but they really didn't show you anything through the first half of the game that gave you a lot of hope for the second half of the game. You know what I mean? And that obviously ended up being true. And Carolina offensively just completely flat when it came to the offense yesterday, and that ended up being their downfall against a JMU pitching staff that, again, we talked about coming to the weekend, was not great. I don't believe they'd shut anybody out the entire season prior to Sunday, and that's how South Carolina's season comes to an end, which, again, I feel like makes it sting a little bit worse. Because not only did you lose and get eliminated, you lost in very ugly, very boring fashion. And as if people were not already fired up and passionate enough about what they want the future of this program to be, I think a very sluggish and slow loss just only added fuel to that fire. And here we are again on this Monday and talking about what the future of this program is. And Ray is about the only one right now that believes that Coach Kingston will be back next year, as everybody else is on the, hey, let's go find a new head coach train at this point in time. I'll get into more of your reactions in a moment. I do think it's want to look around the rest of the SEC, as this was a historic year for the SEC in the tournament. 11 teams making it in. Now, that's not without its controversy, as there was certainly certainly a team like Florida that many people thought it was not good enough to get in, that occupied that 11th spot, as opposed to a team like College of Charleston, which a lot of people thought should have been in, that did not get allowed in. Many people are still upset about that. You know, you had teams like LSU, Vanderbilt that helped out their cause a lot last week with how they played in Hoover, that all advanced into Super Regionals. So in the last year of the SEC being a 14-team league, all but 3 of those teams did end up making the baseball postseason. And of course, South Carolina, they're gone. They were, losing their final 2 games out there in Raleigh and not even making it to late on Sunday. Alabama, a very quick 2-game exit in their regional, as they were a team that, again, South Carolina saw a week ago, and we didn't really know what their ceiling was going to be when it came to the postseason, but they did not last very long in their in their respective bracket. Trying to see what the scores were, because they were down there in Tallahassee, and they ended up getting bounced by Stetson in the elimination games. They lost a high-scoring game to UCF on Friday, come up 1 run short there, and then just got blanked by Stetson on Saturday, and that was all she wrote for Alabama in their respective regional. I mentioned a moment ago, Vanderbilt was a team that had helped their cause out quite a bit last week, and in turn helped out South Carolina's, RPI and all that kind of stuff by continuing to win in Hoover, and they ended up drawing what we thought South Carolina was going to end up drawing early on last week, that being the Clemson regional. And much like Alabama, Vanderbilt quickly there and gone, as they got dominated by Coastal 13-3 on Friday, and then lost a nip and tuck high-scoring affair in the elimination game on Saturday to High Point University. So Vanderbilt also in the 0-2 club with SEC teams in the NCAA tournament. Arkansas won that. This surprised a lot of people, as a host out there in Fayetteville, one of the top seeds in all the country. They didn't make it out. They, handled Southeastern Missouri State in the opening game of their weekend, lose a tight one to Kansas State, and then get beat by SEMO in the elimination game on Saturday early Sunday to get bounced from their own regional. Kansas State makes it out. They'll advance to a super, taking on Virginia coming up this weekend. Mississippi State, I don't know how high people were on them as a team going into the postseason, as they were in that Charlottesville regional against Virginia. Did make it all the way to Sunday's game, but they were no match for UVA, as UVA cruised to a pretty comfortable win, 9-2, to advance on to the super regional there. Florida down there in Stillwater, and again, a team that many people weren't sure if they were good enough to be in the tournament, has done enough to force a winner-take-all game tonight. They beat Nebraska. They lost Oklahoma State the first time around on Saturday, won the elimination game on Sunday against Nebraska, beat Oklahoma State late last night out there in Stillwater, and forced the winner-take-all. Not tonight, this afternoon, 3 o'clock on ESPNU. You'll actually be able to see that game. So the Gators making most of their opportunity of getting into the postseason. Texas A&M, no problems advancing out of their super regional, as they will move on to take on out of their regional, as they'll move on to take on Oregon this upcoming weekend in the supers. LSU, what a topsy-turvy season this has been for them. They were a team that many people had left for dead halfway through the year, as they just did not look anywhere near as good as they looked season ago. And yeah, lost a little bit of talent, a lot of good players and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think people were expecting the drop-off that this team had this season. But they turned it on at the right time, got hot in Hoover, obviously rode that all the way to playing in the championship game and beating South Carolina twice in the process. And boy, did they have some comebacks this weekend in their Chapel Hill Regional, coming back against Wofford, hitting a bunch of home runs late in the game to get that win, and then being able to, after falling to North Carolina, charging back a second time against Wofford after they got out to a lead early on Sunday, picked up 13-6 win, and then beat North Carolina 8-4 in last night's game. They also force a winner-take-all game tonight up the road in Chapel Hill, 6 o'clock. That game will be on ESPN2. Tennessee, no problem handling things with their respective regional, as they moved on to Knoxville, and then Kentucky blanking Indiana State in their final game yesterday to move on to a super regional themselves. And perhaps the most entertaining game of the day will happen just down the road, or just over in Athens, as Georgia takes care of Georgia Tech in 10 innings. Georgia went into the 8th inning down 3 runs, were able to put things together in the between the 8th and the went into the 8th down, were able to put things together between the 8th, 9th, and the 10th, and ended up pulling off that victory there to eliminate their rivals and move on to their first super regional, as I mentioned, for the first time since they went to the College World Series all the way back in 2008. And, by comparison standards, I do think that reflects poorly on Coach Kingston as well, because, again, Wes Johnson is in his first year as the head coach at Georgia. First year as head coach anywhere. And, just being a pitching coach in all of his prior stops. And he has now taken a team to their first super regional in 16 years and has a very good shot at going to Omaha, as they'll square off against NC State this upcoming weekend out there in Athens, to see who's going to be one of those 8 teams with the opportunity to play for the World Series out there in Omaha coming up here in a couple of weeks. So, again, the SEC as a whole about split in half this weekend with the first round of the NCAA tournament, and a couple more left standing going forward. So still a chance for an SEC team, several SEC teams, to make it to Omaha, but some of the ones that people were very high on, including teams like Arkansas, getting bounced before ever getting close to that opportunity to make it to Omaha this year. Get a few more of your thoughts on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100, as we wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday on the Game. Welcome back in. Extra Point, Tyler Head along with you for a few more minutes here. Wes Mitchell will jump in here with me at the top of the 11 o'clock hour for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Chris Clark off this week. A little bit of family time on vacation, so we'll let him do that, as that'll be me and Wes holding down the fort as the week goes along. Again, appreciate all you weighing in this morning on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Same thing for Love Chevrolet phone lines. I read this text in the break there, and I think it's really important to bring up because it relates to something that we talked about a little bit earlier on in the season. Jacob weighs in and says, the only option you have is to fire Kingston. When the stadium is consistently half full with ranked matchups, you only have one option. Apathy is taken over. If we keep Kingston, Founders Park will be a ghost town next year. And that reminds me, let's go back to the Arkansas series several weeks back. Terry and I talked about this the next day, and I believe it was Kip Bucknight on the TV broadcast that initially brought it up. And I've kind of kept this in the back of my mind since then, because watching on TV and being in person is a little bit different, but it's something you can notice. He was wondering why the energy was just not there. The excitement was not there. You were welcoming in one of the best teams in the country in Arkansas, and it just seemed like everybody was kind of, wasn't into it as much. And at the time, it was an interesting thought and something that, again, we talked about in the days after that, but didn't really bring up again. But when you kind of look at where this program is and what it's done over 7 years, there does seem to be that apathy. There does seem to be that lack of belief that they're going to overachieve. You know what I mean? And if you're content with South Carolina being over 500, making it to the SEC tournament, having a shot at the NCAA tournament every year, you're probably pretty satisfied with what you've seen. But if you're one of those people that once you've tasted the filet mignon that is a national championship, you don't want to go back to spam, then this is a little bit tougher to swallow. And I'm not saying that this South Carolina program is at the bottom of the barrel or a poverty program or anything like that. They're just not amazing. And they once were. And that is a really hard transition for a fan base, for an alumni base, for a lot of people to have, to know that you were at the mountaintop and now you're not there anymore. Because in your mind, you always want to think that, right? You always want to think that you're kind of the standard of college baseball. And for a time, you were. I think everybody looked at South Carolina as the model program, like, hey, we want to be that. We want to play like them. We want to develop like them. We want to do X, Y, and Z, just like South Carolina does. That's not the case anymore. And again, I'll go back to the point that I brought up about Tony Vitello leading up to the Tennessee series. I really think South Carolina was an afterthought. I don't think the number one team in the country really was intimidated at all by playing South Carolina. And that, for a long time, wasn't the case, because everybody was afraid to play this team because of how great they were. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I do think this team is just kind of settled into that middle ground of the SEC, which, again, that's not terrible. It's not like you're missing Hoover or anything like that. Like, you are playing meaningful baseball. And here's the thing. You have good wins. Carolina has jumped up and beaten good teams this year, and it seems to be something they do every single year. So it's not like every time you take on a great opponent, you're going to get smoked. They've shown the ability and the talent to be able to beat really good teams, but it's not consistent. And that is where I think that apathy stems from, that you can enjoy that one win in the moment, say like the Kentucky run rule, but your mind immediately shifts like, oh, well, I don't know what next week is going to be. Where great programs, and yes, nobody goes undefeated in baseball. You're going to lose series. That's just part of the game. But great programs, you have that confidence about them. They're like, hey, we just won huge series against Team A. We got Team B next week. Oh, we should be fine against them too. Or at least be able to take 2 out of 3 or whatever it may be. With South Carolina this season, it just did not feel that way. And a lot of that goes back to pitching, because most everybody else has a rotation. They have a set 3 guys they're going to go through, use throughout the weekend, and that's going to be their consistent thing going forward. Carolina never had that. You had Eli Jones, then you just had a cavalcade of supporting characters sliding into that Saturday and Sunday role as season went along, and that's just not going to give you too much long-term success, unfortunately. And again, South Carolina did end up learning that the hard way. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't good pitching performances, and I'll even say I think Dylan Eskew had a great outing yesterday, minus the 1 home run that he gave up. But when your offense can't score any runs at all for only the second time this season, then that kind of stuff gets overlooked. And that's unfortunate, but again, that's part of the gig of where this team and this program is as of right now. Again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, opening you up to possibilities of things that could happen, but there's a chance that Kingston's back again next year. And as Jacob said, I think there's going to be a lot of apathy with the fan base at that point in time, not a whole lot of belief in it. But we'll see what happens. I don't envy the people that have to make these decisions. I don't envy the people that have to coach in these positions. They get paid very well, but it is a very hard job, and a lot of tough decisions have to be made. And I do believe that they are, if not already talking about it, on the verge of talking about a potential tough decision when it comes to Mark Kingston here at South Carolina. Again, we've been talking about it all morning long. It's the dominant headline of the day. We'll get Wes Mitchell's thoughts on it coming up next as we jump into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, as well as the recruiting weekend. It was a very big weekend for Coach Beamer and his staff, bringing in a lot of great talent. We'll see what Wes's thoughts and recap of that are coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. 11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is now time for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell jumping here with me in a minute as he is tending to some breaking news. And in the process of wrapping up that last hour, as I was reacting to some of your thoughts on the Firehouse Subs text line at 834-46100, we did get confirmation, first reported by John Whittle of the Big Spur, confirmed by David Cloninger of the State Newspaper, as well as being reported on by Kendall Rogers of D1 Baseball. From National Perspective, Coach Kingston has been relieved of his duties as the South Carolina head baseball coach, and now the search will indeed be on for a replacement and a new head skipper for the South Carolina Gamecocks baseball team. So again, if you're just jumping in your car or have not been on Twitter as of right now, it is the news being reported again first by John Whittle of the Big Spur that I change at the helm of South Carolina baseball has indeed been made, and now we will see what Ray Tanner and the Athletic Association Board Trustees decide to do going forward. To recap, Coach Kingston here since 2018, about a total record of 217 wins, 155 losses, under 500 in conference play at 83-96. Did end up making it to the postseason 4 times. Went as far as the Fayetteville Super Regional in year number 1, hosted a regional unofficially back in 2021, hosted again last year, being able to make it out of that, going to the Gainesville Super Regional before losing to Florida, who went on to be the World Series runner-up. And then, of course, yesterday, the latest news with South Carolina falling in the first game of Sunday, the elimination game, to James Madison and ending their season after 62 games in the regional up there in Raleigh. But as I'm talking about all more long, it is a tough thing to talk about. It's a tough decision to, come about to, right? But because you are talking about a person, you're talking about their, livelihood and the money they make and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, when you come to a place like South Carolina, there is a level of expectation. There is a minimum standard of what people expect out of a program, what they expect this program to achieve, and what they expect this program to do. And unfortunately for Coach Kingston, they weren't there. They didn't live up to it. And some of you weighing in that maybe this decision should have been made a couple of years ago. And again, I've only been ingrained in South Carolina baseball, covering it from the perspective of this radio station for the past 2 years, and even going back to the beginning of last year, my first season here on, really being ingrained from this program, the conversations were happening then of people wanting to move on from Coach Kingston. So this is a sentiment that people have shared for a long time. And now it is, now it's come to pass where Coach Kingston is out as head coach of South Carolina, and now the search will be on to find his replacement, to find who's going to be the one to lead this program going forward. And I see some of you already weighing in, throwing out the name of Monty Lee, who, of course, has been the assistant under Coach Kingston these past 2 years, previous head coaching experience, obviously. And, it was a big part of getting this offense clicked back into gear a season ago. It's had its ups and downs this year, obviously. Obviously, yesterday was not great. But that is a possibility. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do, but that's certainly a name that is going to be on the table. But now you have free reign to look for a new guy. Look to see who that next person is going to be. Again, I don't know how long this thought has been, with Coach Tanner, with powers that be that end up making these decisions, but the fact that this happens the day after regional comes to an end does feel like it's been on their mind for a while. And when I say it's a tough decision, I know it's really easy to look at things purely from a result standpoint and all that kind of stuff. But again, when you're talking about the relationships that you have with these coaches and from an AD perspective, board trustees perspective and all that kind of stuff, it can be hard to fire someone. Like that is not, I'm not making that up. That can be a hard thing to do that some programs and some people have a harder time doing, have a harder time pulling the trigger on. The results obviously speak for themselves, and Coach Kingston has underperformed here at South Carolina. But again, I was playing devil's advocate. There could have been a possibility that they could have brought him back next season. That is obviously not the case, and they have moved on from him, and and are now going to go out there and search for the next one. And what does this mean from a roster retention standpoint? I don't know. What does this mean from a transfer portal standpoint of what kind of talent you can bring in? Again, I don't know. And we're not going to know until we find out who the next guy is going to be, right? And again, a lot of people are throwing names out there as of right now, and I don't know who's on Ray Tanner's list. I don't know what relationships he has with these coaches, because that matters a lot too. Like guys you have prior relationships with, guys that you already know, who may jump up to the top of your list. I don't necessarily know which way they're going to go with it. I'm sure our guy Jack Belcher from Gamecock Central probably has a short list of guys that he believes South Carolina will be pointing towards. But it's going to be a wait and see process. And now we're in this weird purgatory, I guess is maybe kind of the best way to put it, where you don't know who the helm of your program is. And you would hope and assume that it's going to be a pretty quick hire, so that you can start building your roster for next year. And that's an important point that Jack brought up when we talked to him a little bit earlier is, the transfer portal window is opening. And it will be open for right at a month, and there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of guys going in, a lot of guys going out. And you want to figure out who's going to be your skipper as soon as possible. So, when you're going out there and seeing guys in the transfer portal, well, for one, they know who they're going to play for, right? You know what I mean? So that's an important thing to get solved, hopefully relatively quickly. And again, this news literally only about 10 minutes old. Again, first reported on by John Whittle of the Big Spur. David Kloniger also reporting on it. Multiple outlets, including D1 Baseball's Kendall Walsh, also weighing in on it and reporting on it as well. So it's officially official that Coach Kingston is no longer the head coach here at South Carolina, and they'll be looking for a new skipper after Kingston led this program for the past 7 years and did indeed come up short this weekend in the Raleigh Regional, bringing a close to another season that, again, people are going to feel very underwhelmed with at the end of the day. Wes Mitchell now jumping here with me as we got that breaking news a little over 10 minutes ago, but confirmed by multiple outlets that, again, as we kind of expected, Coach Kingston no longer the head coach here at South Carolina.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's surprised. This is something that's been anticipated, I would say, even before the end of the year. You were sort of saying, hey, if there aren't certain expectations that are met, this is likely going to happen. I think it was kind of a little bit of an outward secret around here. Like there were certain expectations that had been set. And, I think you're always – I know the fans, a lot of them are probably happy and excited right now. I always look at it a little bit differently. Never like to see somebody lose their job. You really don't. And
right.
If you and I didn't really personally know Mark Kingston, but everything I had heard was he's a great person, does the job, with respect for his players and their families and the administration, everybody around him. Like, you never really heard a bad word about Mark Kingston, you know what I'm saying, as a person. So you do hate it. And I think you have to look past a little bit of the sports side with how you react to something. And, as we know, fans get a little too caught up sometimes in just the negativity of what happens on the field. But then you look to the other side of it, and if you want to talk about it just from a professional standpoint, and 7 years at a place, and were there reasons along the way that you'd say, well, hey, give it one more year? I say yes. Then you had, right, I guess pretty much, let's see, in the very middle of it, you had COVID.
Yep.
And, that was a thing where obviously that affected everybody. And so you said, all right, this is not the time, and you were making a football change at the time as well. And then you look at, I think, last year's squad, and you're like, man, this has actually kind of come together. And then, as good as they looked at times, the injuries started to mount, and last year ended not what you would call, you can't call a disappointment in the grand scheme, in my opinion.
Sure.
But I think when you look at the reality of what that season could have been, if they could have remained healthy and maybe had a few breaks, that felt like an Omaha team at times. And ultimately, I think it comes back to that. In 7 years, no trips to Omaha. And that's something where you got to realistically know you're not going to Omaha every year.
Right.
In today's SEC ball, too, you're not going every other year. You might not be going every 3 or 4 years. But do you want to consistently compete for that? Of course, that's your goal. If you get to Omaha, it's a successful season, and then you let the chips fall where they may.
Sure.
And so I think ultimately this is pretty cut and dry. It was there's no controversy. There's no, well, hey, he did this, that, off the field. Handled everything completely the way he should have. The final results just, I think, were not overall good enough. And that doesn't mean you have to hate Mark Kingston or his family or any of that.
Sure.
It's just it's a fact of sports.
And it is. And I brought this up several times this morning. This is, at the end of the day, a person we're talking about. This is a job that he's losing. And again, he's not poor by any means, going to get a big buyout and all that kind of stuff. So he's going to be just fine. He's probably going to find another head coaching job somewhere else. But that is the human element that we do kind of overlook with these things sometimes. But I think, making that super last year set everybody's expectations going into this season, saying, okay, well, that's probably the bare minimum of what you should do. You should at least get back to a super, if not make that step and go to Omaha this year, and to go out there and do what they did this past weekend, where, yes, you had the amazing walk-off win against James Madison on Friday night, but everything past that just didn't look great. And you were in there against NC State, gave up those runs late in the game, and weren't able to put anything together in the last couple of innings, pick up the win. Then you just looked completely lethargic yesterday from an offensive standpoint against James Madison. So you really kind of went out with a whimper at the end of the day to close out the season.
Yeah, and that will be a lot of people's final memory of this season and the Kingston era. To me, that's one game. Ultimately, it's about the totality of these 7 years, and I think for South Carolina, the expectations are very high for that spot. The league you're in is as competitive as it ever is, and frankly, I think the fans have spoken on this one. Not that the fans ultimately always know all,
sure,
but there's a difference between a segment of your fan base being upset and loud and sort of reacting to losses and stuff like that. That's part of it. I'm not bashing fans at all. I'm just saying,
sure,
ultimately, when the fans speak, and what I mean by the fans speak, I'm not talking about the sort of little minority of fans that's going to just be ticked off regardless. I'm talking about, so me and my wife went to 2 of the 3 games against Georgia, and that was a series that was supposed to be winner gets a regional. Winner gets to host a regional.
Yeah, Carolina was a national seed at that point in time.
Yeah, and if you turned on the TV compared to like just average baseball community or whatever, those weren't bad crowds.
Sure.
Those were not the energetic, into the game, sold out baseball crowds that I have watched being just a baseball fan in this town for decades, basically. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. I know we got to hit a break, but there's a lot to obviously talk about here.
Yeah, plenty to unpack. And again, if you're just getting in your car or whatever, Coach Kingston has been relieved of his head coaching duties here at South Carolina, first reported on by John Whittle.
And by the way, real quick,
Spur.
it's also Jack just texted me. It has been confirmed by a school spokesman as well.
Okay.
So it's officially official.
Yes. So now the search for new head coach at South Carolina will be ongoing, and we'll see what direction they decide to go with that. Again, plenty to unpack from this breaking news as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Monday here on The Game.
All right, like Tyler said, presented by Firehouse Subs. Guess what? Every single episode of GC Takeover is presented by our friends at Firehouse Subs. It is almost lunchtime. guess what? That means order right now. It's the perfect time to order from firehousesubs.com or by downloading the Firehouse Subs app. Easiest, most efficient way to hit that rapid rescue to go and avoid the wait. They're going to have your awesome toasted sub waiting for you right there on the shelf when you walk in. It's going to be in a bag, and you're going to have your chips in the bag as well, so you don't even have to grab those. Grab your drink, head along your way, and have an efficient lunch hour by not having to wait on your food. If you want some ideas for what to try, you can try this new barbecue Cuban. It's Southern roots with a Cuban twist. Or it was recently National Brisket Day. Try brisket, add bacon. That's by far my favorite. That's my number one on the Power Rankings. Whatever you get, order it right now. FirehouseSubs.com or Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell along with you here on this Monday. Chris Clark hanging out with family this week. We'll get him back in coming up next week, though. I'm sure he is enthralled with phone calls and text messages right now with the breaking news that's not even half an hour old of Coach Kingston being relieved of his duties as the head coach here at South Carolina for baseball. We were just looking at the press release from the official website, GamecocksOnline.com, and there's something interesting to note at the bottom that associate head coach and recruiting coordinator Monty Lee will serve as the interim head coach for the time being here at South Carolina until they can hire somebody else, if they do hire somebody else, because Coach Lee, prior coaching experience, could be one of those options.
Yeah, I think he's on the list, but I think you also have to, if you're let's go into fan mode. If you're a Gamecock fan out there, you want South Carolina to kick the tires on several guys, and I'm sure, you know, every AD supposedly has that mythical sheet in their that list in their pocket that they pull out, and essentially this is who they would hire. And I'm sure there are some guys that have been on that list probably for a long time, Tyler. There's probably some guys that get added this year where you're like, hey, this young up-and-comer looks great. And here's the thing. You know, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they're like, well, who do you go get? I'm like, I don't know, but here's the thing. This is how coaching cycles work. And once it seems clear that you need an interjection of energy to a program,
right?
You decide to make a move. There's no foolproof unless you're like South Carolina hiring Steve Spurrier in football. There's no like just guaranteed like, oh, this guy definitely is. I mean, look at Georgia this year. They go hire an assistant, and he quickly proved like, hey, he's a sharp guy. He was ready for the job. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think that also, you know, made Coach Kingston's case a little bit worse, that a program that you feel like you've been ahead of for the past decade passed you by in year one for a guy that had never been a head coach before. And I think, again, it's not the reason why Coach Kingston got fired. It's not, but it certainly didn't help.
It didn't. And, you know, here's the thing. I think, Tyler, I think in some ways it is harder than ever to have what South Carolina fans want, and that's consistency.
Yep.
They don't want the up, the down. They don't want to be, 2 wins from Omaha last year and then just fighting for their lives at the end of this year.
Right.
Harder than ever because of the portal and because of how strong the league is. At the same time, it is easier than ever if you make the right hire and if you have NIL sources or resources and funding coming in to have a quick turnaround and kind of feel like you're in a position to compete. Now, everybody else in your league is doing the same thing, so except for Missouri, and they stink.
Right.
But I think so. But now keeping everybody together and remaining that sort of consistent front and doing those things is harder than ever, I think, because the margin for error, that's Chris Clark's favorite phrase, margin for error is so tight in this league. But I think, and going back a little bit to what we were talking about before we had to hit the break, didn't you just feel like at times this was just some ugly baseball? Like that to me was the final, and I hate to be like the old guy that's like, oh, you got to get back to fundamentals. But, dude, when you're getting people doubled off in the last game of the year on line drives that aren't really hit all that hard, all the defensive miscues down the stretch, and I know different teams are going to have different strengths and weaknesses. We all know that. But all the just – and sometimes you have to – shuffle a lineup and a defensive lineup because of injuries. We all get that, but just it was a constant just thinking you could plug and play guys, I feel like, and very analytics driven in all decisions, and it just wasn't clean enough, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and Coach Kingston came in with that analytical mindset, which again is the newer age of baseball, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think, and I'll go back to something like we talked about a little bit earlier on, where you had Causey pinch hitting for LeCroy in the 9th inning on Saturday, and Coach Kingston's defense of that was the analytics that supported, left-handed hitters being more favorable against that pitcher than right-handed hitters, which I get to a degree, but at the same time, Tyler Causey hadn't really played in the past month. There was a reason why we weren't high on him getting that third base spot on Friday, because he just had not been playing as of late. So I think the same kind of thing applies to putting him in that situation. So again, I understand the numbers and I understand, trends and all that kind of stuff, but sometimes you just got to go off that gut feel on that what is working for you type of thing that unfortunately Kingston wasn't as keen on, it didn't seem like.
I think, Tyler, and this was not just a new thing. I felt like this was throughout the entire time. I felt like there was always a sense from Kingston that you could just plug guys into different spots defensively, and it was like, let me get my best 9 out there.
Right.
And if this guy, because he's practiced at this position, we can just throw him in there. And it was a constant just rotation of, hey, you go play this, you go play that. And I get having some guys with versatility. I forget being able to move your sort of chess pieces around to get your best lineups. But to me, it went to an extreme. And I think there is something to be said for having a comfort level at a position, getting settled in, and kind of when you go into postseason play, you don't, and again, I get it. Sometimes you just have injuries pile up.
Sure.
But still, a lot of the defensive issues just throughout the entire tenure, I'm not just talking about this year, go back to being like, hey, man, we need you in the lineup. Can you go play this position? Even though you haven't, Dylan Brewer, again, I understand why, but Dylan Brewer's playing first base and he hasn't played it in a game since he was at Clemson. They had to, go steal a glove from somewhere. So, that's tough to put those guys in that spot because I think when you're talking about, again, small margin for error, that little bit of hesitation because you're not comfortable at a spot because you haven't played it as much matters in these big-time games, I think.
Well, look what happened last weekend against LSU in the semifinals of of Hoover, where you take out Lee Croy because he's just been making mistake after mistake. You put Lee Ellis out there who hasn't really played third base, and on that bunt where he runs up there, he thinks that Will Tippett's going to be there to cover third, turns around, nobody's there. Guess what? You end up, and then he airmails the ball to first base.
Because he panics.
Because he panics, so it's just those little things that, again, end up kind of come back to bite you, which you certainly did in that game that, again, we have seen several times this year. So that is certainly, something that, was an issue and, was one of several reasons why Coach Kingston is no longer the coach here.
Yep, and again, it goes back to, obviously, their high expectations.
Yep.
And here's the thing. I know it's easy to get caught up in just the fanatical side of it and the passion and being upset. Mark Kingston's not a bad coach.
No.
I really do not think you don't get to that point, and you don't have – he's had some solid seasons at South Carolina. You don't get to that point by being a bad coach. So, and I firmly believe that. But at the same time, what is the bar you have for what South Carolina wants their coach to be? They want their coach to be, hopefully, elite. They want their coach to at least be great.
Right.
And I think that's just it. He was not a bad coach, but I don't think he proved in the 7 years here to be an elite coach that gave you that edge in terms of management and making the right decisions. You can second guess decisions that baseball coaches make all the time. And when you're talking about a small sample size in a vacuum, you know what? Who's to say you didn't make the right decision? It just turned out wrong.
Sure.
But I think throughout the 7 years, it is fair to say he didn't sort of outmanage your competition in SEC play enough for you to say, you know what, we're going to stick with him.
We'll continue on with this. I also want to loop back around to what we were talking about a minute ago with the apathy that it seemed to be at times this year, especially in home venues like Founders Park. We'll get into that as we continue to react to the news of Coach Kingston no longer being the head coach here at South Carolina. Monty Lee taking over in the interim. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
All right, guys, let me continue to tell you about our friends over at Classic Roofing. Hit them up, 803-590-7870, or head on over to classicroofingsc.com for more information on their services and where you can set up a free estimate. And why might you want to set up that free estimate? Because, obviously, you want to protect your roof. If you own your home, the roof is one of the most, frankly, expensive but most important parts of your roof. You want to make sure you're taken care of there. There's also been a lot of storms hitting the area lately. You want to let them check your roof because you may not actually need to file a claim, and you actually do not want to file an insurance claim for no reason. They're going to give you an honest assessment instead of just blindly being like, hey, file a claim, they'll take care of it, because there could be some long-term repercussions for that. So, again, if you want to get a free estimate, if you've had some damage from a storm, call them today, 803-590-7870, or head on over to classicroofingsc.com.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, along with you. And what we're talking about is the news, less than an hour old, of Coach Kingston being relieved of the duties as head coach here at South Carolina. Monty Lee serving as the interim coach for the time being, as the head coaching search will begin to see who the new skipper will be for 2025. I want to go back to something you were talking about a few minutes ago. You mentioned you were there for the Georgia series, which, again, at the time, South Carolina came in as a projected national seed. We knew that series was going to be important, as would be the next one against Tennessee on the road. And there just seemed to be a little bit of an apathy with the fan base, not just in that series, but really as the season went along. And I referenced Kip Alknight, who was on the call for the Arkansas series a couple weeks earlier, and he even made mention of it on Friday when, like, man, you know, you should be energetic. This place should be jammed to the gills and should be going crazy like a playoff type of atmosphere. And it just never really seemed to be that way this year. And again, everybody comes in the season with a lot of expectations, a lot of hope for what the team's going to be. But as the season went along, and there just didn't seem to be that consistency, despite having some good wins and some good series victories. I think the fan base, whether they meant to or not, just kind of showed that they didn't believe in this team as much as maybe they thought when the season began.
Yeah, and when I think, again, there's a difference between just a small group of fans that are sort of letting their thoughts be known, and when that sort of extends out to everybody. And, again, going back to that Georgia series, I was there for 2 of the games, and I was like, man, this crowd, this should feel like a football game. Like, this should be a big-time atmosphere. And it just wasn't. It wasn't a bad atmosphere, but there wasn't a lot of energy in the building. It was not sold out. It was not packed, like you said. And to me, that said a lot. That said a lot about this proud fan base, this baseball-loving fan base, that they just were not into it. And I also, Tyler, want to point out how quick this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you go into a season and you sort of set an expectation of, hey, it's getting possibly to the end of a tenure, maybe the expectations have not been met, and you just sort of internally kind of say, well, hey, this needs to happen, or we're just going to have to make a change. It really makes it very easy at the end. Not that it's ever easy to fire someone, and again, these are people.
Sure.
But the decision itself becomes easy. And to me, it just seems like that's the case, right? Like, there was no waiting around. There was no, let's let this go through the week. It was, you kind of must do now what you're ultimately going to do if you already have the decision. So you just make the decision and go.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack brought up a point earlier, the transfer portal is opening. You're going to have guys going in and out, so you can already start putting together what your team's going to be for next season. So I do think that hiring the coach quickly is probably the better option to go there. And, I don't know what that line of job saving would have been. If you get back to a super, would that have been enough to bring him back? Did you have to go to Omaha or something like that? It's tough to say at this point in time, and I don't know if we'll ever get a realistic answer on that or not. But I think we all kind of agreed that just getting to a regional, especially not hosting it at that, was not going to be good enough for this team this year.
To me, and again, I'm not speaking for like Ray Tanner or Chance Miller and those guys, but if you could get the 2 straight supers, to me, that does show some level of consistency. And just saying, in this climate, you made it to the Sweet 16 2 years in a row, essentially, is what that is. And
right.
So, yeah, I think you're safe. Now, I think even then, Tyler, you would need to have a pretty strong plan for at least behind the scenes of, this is how we're going to keep this going. This is how we plan to attack the portal. And I think they really, going into last season when they hired Monty Lee, they were very successful in the portal as well. You saw kind of the formula. And, again, until there were injuries, it worked. Sure. And, you can win at South Carolina. Is it easy? No. But you can win at South Carolina. And I think that going into this year, it was as simple, in my opinion. Some of the transfer portal misses, like some of the names we were tracking, you look back, and these are big-name guys. These are guys that had great seasons elsewhere.
Yep.
And you did have some transfer portal wins. You obviously brought back guys like Petrie and Messina. And, I thought down the stretch, Blake Jackson was fantastic. Like, you brought in some guys, Kennedy Jones, that helped your team. But you also missed on some of the guys that I thought, both from a pitching staff standpoint and a couple of guys as far as, hitters and defenders that could have taken this team from being more of a middle to lower of the pack SEC team to really being a contending SEC team. And sometimes in today's SEC, today's college baseball, it is as simple as that,
yep.
Honestly, I think. So, the expectations are what they are. It's going to be tough for any coach to come in, but also you're going to get a boost from bringing in new life, bringing in new energy.
Sure.
And it's going to start as well on the NIL side. I think if you're a fan and you're wanting to win, unfortunately, You can hate it, love it, everything in between. You're going to be asked to Garnet Trust is going to be calling.
Sure, and that goes back to the apathy part that you mentioned there. When you have a fan base that does not believe in the head coach, does not believe this program is capable of achieving the heights they want them to see, then they're not going to be as reluctant to want to hand over their hard-earned money to a program that they don't think is going to be able to do that.
And who can blame them?
And I get that. I totally get that. It's hard to part with money, especially in today's world, economically and stuff like that. So if you're bringing a new coach that you believe is going to, light some fire back under this program and establish a good foundation that's going to build and give you success for years to come, then you're likely going to be more apt to want to give to that and to build the program back up to where it once was. And let's not overstate this. It is hard to achieve what Ray Tanner did as a head coach here. Back-to-back national championship, played for a third one, perennial Omaha team. Like, that does not happen to everyone. And even, coming in after him, Chad Holbrook, obviously Mark Kingston as well, to have to live up to those expectations is next to impossible. But that doesn't mean that you should still be, again, in that middle tier of, all right, we just make it to a regional every couple of years, and that's pretty much it. He kind of fell a little bit lower than where people, were okay with them falling, and that's why we're in the situation we're in now.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I think, is this the same SEC that Ray Tanner was in? No, it's not.
They did set a record for most teams ever put in the tournament this year, by the way.
Yeah, it's
much tougher.
Just not. And you have to acknowledge that. At the same time, I'm not going to be this guy that sits here and tells you, you can't win at South Carolina. You shouldn't try. You
Right.
shouldn't have high expectations. You absolutely should have high expectations. And again, that doesn't mean I always felt like your realistic expectations should actually be slightly above what you even end up getting most years. Like, you're not going to hit if you have high enough expectations, you're not going to hit them every year.
Sure.
But you want to be competing for them every year. And that's kind of been the difference, I think. And, I think there's a lot of directions you could go. People, by the way, Firehouse Subs text line.
It's blowing up.
It's already blowing up.
Yeah.
So I know we already got some names. Send us all your names.
Yep.
It's 803-44-6100.
Yep.
Firehouse Subs text line. And send us all your names. We're going to get everything from Landon Powell, I'm sure, to top assistants, I'm sure, to there will be people that say throw the bank at the number one coach in the country, whoever you think that is, because we are South Carolina baseball. You're going to get everything in between. Ultimately, it's going to be up to Ray Tanner, Chance Miller, those guys to make this hire and decide what's best. And guess what? It could be there's nothing that says a great assistant doesn't turn into the top coach in the country. There's nothing that says Landon Powell can't win at South Carolina. But there's going to be arguments for and against everybody you could mention.
Yeah, and again, a lot of you already weighing in. If you have a thought, the Firehouse Subs text on 803-446-100. We'll get some of those to wrap up today's show. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at Gold Line Framing. Check them out. As I've been telling you for months and probably a year now, they want to handle any and all of your custom framing needs. Right now, maybe you got a graduate in your life that just got that brand new diploma. How about helping them take it to the next level by getting them a custom framing job from Gold Line Framing? Also, they can frame up original artwork, canvases, jerseys, flags, signed prints, pretty much anything you can think of. They will frame it up for you. Call them today, 803-739-1337. Promise you, my friend Kendall Walsh, manager Johnny James, they're going to take outstanding care of you just like they do us every time we head on over there to 511 12th Street, West Columbia. In store, we check out their great art gallery, home decor, furniture, gift items. You can as well. Call them today. Set something up if you got questions. Again, Gold Line Framing, 803-739-1337.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, along with you for a few more minutes here, continuing to react to the news of South Carolina looking for a new head baseball coach after Coach Kingston was relieved of his duties following South Carolina's exit from the NCAA tournament after falling to James Madison 2-0 yesterday up there in the Raleigh Regional. And we asked, who do you want to see as the next head coach of South Carolina? And boy, we were getting a lot of names getting thrown in here. Obviously, Monty Lee, a very popular one as he is the interim coach, and that could be a easy transition if they decided to do that. Landon Powell, a former Gamecock coaching up the road in North Greenville, another name that's getting brought up a lot. Got one vote for our guy Stuart Lake, by the way. Don't know how he'd feel about that one, but
Love Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart's great. Some assistants here: Josh Elander from Tennessee, Josh Jordan from LSU. So a lot of options on the table. The Landon Powell one seems to be the most common one I'm getting so far, and that's an interesting thing because you have the connection of him being a former Gamecock, obviously understands the program, understands the tradition, the expectations, all that kind of stuff. That's still a transition from D1 to the D2 to the SEC. That is a risk you'd be taking if you did decide to go with that hire. Now, good baseball coach is a good baseball coach, but you don't always know if that transition is going to work.
You don't. And, guys, I'm thinking, so I'm going to try to both sides this one, Tyler. I'm just going to admit it. But I think there's an argument to be made on both sides because so the one thing you see people say that are completely against it, they're like, well, would, pick a random, would LSU consider Landon Powell if they haven't had an opening?
Right.
They say, you're only considering him because he's a Gamecock.
Right.
And my answer to that would be if he checked all the other boxes, understand that's a big if. But if he checked every single other box, it changes who he is as a coach for you because he is a Gamecock.
Right.
So that doesn't this is not just picking, let's make Jackie Bradley Jr. the head coach because he played for South Carolina. Like you see, fans love the idea of having a former player as their head coach.
Sure.
It doesn't usually work out, frankly. But if he checks the other boxes, then is it not going to help in the South Carolina baseball community that they have one of their own in terms of support?
That does.
Is he not a guy who could maybe, if this generates more support, rally the NIL resources needed in order to go win? Yes, I think so. Would he understand? One thing I never thought Mark Kingston quite understood was the fabric of what you just walked into.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really see him out like in the community. Didn't see him. And if you're winning, guess what? It doesn't matter. But if you're not winning to people's standards, they're going to pick apart anything and everything they can. And when Shane Beamer's at the tennis match and you never see Kingston at these other matches, people talk about it. And again, I'm not trying to pile on. Like, I know it's a tough day for him and his family, but that's things I hear from the fan base. So to me, would LSU hire Landon Powell if they had an opening right now? No, of course not. But would he be on? If you're a smaller program and you're looking for the next hot shot up and coming coach, would he be on their list? Absolutely, he would be. So again, I'm not saying he's ready because I don't know. I'm not saying he's not ready because I don't know. But does it change the hire because of the fact that he would have a greater understanding of your program and everything that's expected and all those things? Yes, it does. So you can't say, well, you're considering him just because he's a Gamecock. No, you're considering him because he's a winner, and the fact he's a Gamecock changes who he would be as a coach for you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and that can certainly help with that buy-in aspect of it, given the fact that, he knows the community knows him. So again, especially in today's world of NIL, where you're saying, hey, I'm coming in as your new head coach, we need to get to this dollar amount to get the kind of talent that we need to get to that level of competing in the SEC. I think a lot of people will be a little bit more lenient to want to give to that as opposed to somebody that maybe they're not quite as familiar with. But again, you are still taking a risk because you don't know how that's going to translate, as opposed to maybe if you decide to go with somebody like Monty Lee, who has been a previous head coach before, does have experience taking Division I teams into the NCAA tournament, might be a bit of a safer option. I don't know where they're going to go. I mean, this is fresh news an hour ago, so the possibilities are limitless here, but all these guys likely going to be on the table as options.
I think most of the fans I've seen want a fresh name, something new, something completely different. But we'll see. We'll see what direction Ray Tanner, Chance Miller, all those guys, what direction they go with this thing ultimately. But you at the end of the day, there's no safe hire. Like, there's no guarantee.
No, of course
You're
not.
dealing in percentages, in my opinion. Can you raise the percentage of the chances that this is going to work out?
Sure, sure.
Like assistant coaches, for every hot shot, young, big name assistant coach, you can flip a coin. Like, half of them get into that spot and they realize how much goes into it, and they're just not ready, or they're in over their head. Then you have other guys who seem to just make that transition seamlessly. As we know, this ain't a learn-on-the-job job. The expectations are going to be what they are, whether you're in year 1 or 7, frankly.
Right.
And there'll be a little honeymoon period, as you always get, but fans are going to want to see, in my opinion, progress. They're going to want to see a team that just plays cleaner ball. They're going to want to see a team, frankly, that plays great defense up the middle, because that's what they're used to seeing. I mean, to me, the biggest difference between a lot of the Kingston teams and those Tanner championship teams was just go back and watch the defense that South Carolina played at shortstop, second base, and center field throughout the time that Ray Tanner was here. And so I think there's a certain way that Gamecock fans expect the game of baseball to be played. And so they'll give you a little honeymoon period to start if they're seeing progress towards that, but they do want it to look a certain way. And so who can go out and do that, but who also knows modern ball? I think you want a guy who can connect with in-state high school coaches who might be a little bit old school, but also maybe doesn't – you don't want to abandon the analytics just because – Kingston was analytics heavy.
Right. Some other names thrown out there. Cliff Godwin up the road at East Carolina, taking them to another regional this year. Chris Powell up there at Duke, so kind of local to the region. Obviously, some names they're going to be out there and possible. And again, we'll see who South Carolina does end up talking to and interviewing for this job and how quickly they do indeed fill it. But again, news of the day, Coach Kingston out as the head coach here at South Carolina. We didn't even get into the recruiting weekend. We'll have to save that for tomorrow. But, again, we knew this was going to come, and lo and behold, it came early on Monday morning.
It did. And again, I think that speaks to this too, the timing of it. There was no waiting around. It's here. There will soon be a new coach.
That's right.
The University of South Carolina for baseball.
We'll continue to react to it all day long, and we'll get into the recruiting weekend on tomorrow's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Also, going to be talking to Ja'Kai Moore.
We'll hear from Ja'Kai Moore.
Garner Trust Hour tomorrow. So tune in for that as well. Again, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. He's Wes Mitchell. I'm Tyler Head here on The Game.
All right, guys, before I get out of here, let me tell you about one more of our awesome sponsors. That's our friends at Integrated Media. Call them today, 803-948-8327, or do what I like to do. That's just going over to integratedmediainc.com, where you can get a lot of ideas about their services and some things they have done at other homes, just like they did for Chris Clark, just like they did for me, whether